My family treated me like an unpaid caterer at my brother's lavish engagement party, letting him publicly humiliate me as a lowly paper pusher to impress his wealthy fiancée. They had absolutely no idea that his stunning bride-to-be was the powerhouse CEO who stood in my courtroom a year prior, fighting a massive lawsuit. And by the end of the night, their entire golden illusion would be shattered into a million unrecoverable pieces. Original post. I am Elias, 33 years old. I am a sitting Superior Court judge in the civil division of a major metropolitan district. I make decisions that dictate the flow of millions of dollars, preside over intensely complex corporate litigation, and hold a gavel that commands absolute respect from the most ruthless lawyers in the state. But to my family, I was nothing more than an administrative assistant who sorted mail in a damp basement. And for years, I let them believe exactly that. To understand the absolute unhinged catastrophe that occurred last weekend at my brother's engagement party, you have to understand the deeply rotting foundation my family was built upon. My parents, Arthur and Eleanor, were obsessed with appearances. They viewed their children not as human beings, but as living, breathing extensions of their own social portfolio. My older brother, Pierce, who is 36, was the blue chip stock. From the moment he could walk, he was the undisputed golden child. He was loud, aggressively competitive, naturally athletic, and entirely devoid of basic human empathy. He played varsity sports, dated the wealthiest girls in our affluent suburb, and knew exactly how to manipulate every adult in the room to get whatever he wanted. I was the exact opposite. I was quiet, deeply introverted, and preferred the solitary peace of a public library over the screaming chaos of a football stadium. My parents saw my introversion not as a personality trait, but as a fatal, embarrassing genetic flaw. They viewed my quiet nature as a direct personal insult to their flashy, aggressive lifestyle. The glaring disparity in their treatment was tightly woven into the ugly fabric of our daily lives. When Pierce turned 16, a brand new, shiny Audi was waiting in the driveway with a massive red bow. He totaled it 4 months later, racing, and they immediately bought him a BMW. When I turned 16, my father handed me a plastic city bus pass and coldly told me that navigating public transit would build character and reduce my carbon footprint. The most painful injustice came when it was time for college. My parents had set up a robust $150,000 college fund, something they bragged about constantly at their neighborhood country club. But when Pierce got accepted into an outrageously expensive private university, they drained the entire account to fund his lavish lifestyle. He joined a top-tier fraternity, partied recklessly for 4 years, and graduated by the skin of his teeth with a generic business degree he barely understood. When it was my turn to apply for schools, my mother sat me down, sighed heavily, and played with her diamond rings. She told me that Pierce's education was a critical investment and that I would need to take out massive student loans. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "You understand, don't you, Elias? You're the practical one." I didn't argue. Arguing with them was like screaming at a brick wall. I packed my bags, moved into a terrible, drafty apartment, worked grueling night shifts as a hospital janitor, mopping up biohazards to pay for my law books, ate cheap ramen noodles, and graduated at the very top of my class. The monumental lie about my career started 5 years ago during a chaotic Thanksgiving dinner. I was exhausted, in my final year of law school, aggressively clerking at the downtown courthouse, and drowning in a brutal corporate fraud case that kept me awake for days. I arrived at my parents' house running on 3 hours of sleep. My Aunt Martha, a bitter woman whose primary joy in life was spreading vicious gossip, cornered me. She sneered at my faded sweater and asked what I was doing with my life. I was too tired to explain the complexities of legal clerking, so I simply said I was working at the courthouse. She squinted at me. "The courthouse? Doing what? Filing papers? Are you an administrative assistant?" Before I could correct her, my mother walked by with a tray of food and eagerly chimed in. "Yes, Martha, Elias does the admin work. He keeps the files organized. Not everyone is meant for the corporate fast lane like Pierce. Elias likes a simple, low-stress environment." I stood there holding a plate of cold turkey and felt something fundamental inside my soul snap. I realized in that exact moment that she desperately needed me to be a lowly filing clerk. It made her twisted narrative perfect. The brilliant, wealthy firstborn and the struggling, average second son. If I told her I was top of my law class, she would have minimized it. So I chose silence. I let them build their own comfortable reality. When I passed the state bar exam with the highest score in the district, I celebrated entirely alone with a cheap pizza. When I became a ruthless corporate litigator, they thought I was answering phones. And 3 years ago, when I was officially appointed as one of the youngest judges in the state, I didn't send them the press release. Keeping my status a secret became an impenetrable fortress. It kept their toxic expectations, their constant demands for money, and their backhanded compliments far away from my peaceful life. Only my cousin Chloe, a fiercely practical trauma nurse, knew the truth. She was my anchor to reality. Then, the heavy cream envelope arrived. Pierce's engagement party. Chloe begged me to go and finally drop the gavel on their charade. But I promised her I would just keep a low profile, eat the free catered food, and leave early. I had absolutely no idea I was walking straight into a brutal firing squad. Update 1. I arrived at my parents' sprawling Pacific Northwest estate a full 2 hours before the party. My mother had texted me at dawn, coldly instructing me to pick up 15 heavy bags of ice because they forgot to order enough for the rented bartender. I pulled my modest 5-year-old sedan into the driveway, hauling the freezing plastic bags toward the backyard one by one. My mother was standing on the patio, barking aggressive orders at the catering staff. She wore a designer dress that cost more than my first car. She barely glanced at me. LES put the ice in the silver coolers and wiped down the condensation. I absolutely do not want water rings on the rented mahogany tables. I was a 33-year-old man, a highly respected officer of the court who made decisions affecting millions, being treated like an unpaid intern. But I bit my tongue, wiped the tables, and arranged the embossed cocktail napkins. Chloe arrived an hour later, finding me standing quietly by the tall hedges, nursing a glass of tap water. She looked at my tailored $2,000 charcoal suit, which my family completely ignored, and hissed, "She made you do the heavy lifting again? You need to tell them, Elias. You're a judge, not her personal butler." Before I could calm her down, a low, aggressive engine roar echoed down the street. Pierce pulled up in a sleek, silver Maserati. I knew for an absolute fact it was a lease because I had run his credit history out of sheer curiosity a month prior, but he revved the engine to ensure every eye was on him. He stepped out, adjusting his designer jacket, and opened the door for his fiancée, Audrey. Audrey was breathtaking, but it wasn't just her physical appearance. She wore a deep emerald silk dress that spoke of quiet, immense generational wealth. She stood perfectly tall, her intense gaze sweeping over the crowd with calm, terrifying authority. She was the CEO of a massive logistics empire, a woman used to giving orders in boardrooms and having them followed instantly. My parents rushed forward, parading her around the yard like a prized trophy. Eventually, Pierce, holding a heavy glass of expensive scotch, spotted me trying to blend into the landscaping. "Elias," he yelled over the soft jazz music, "come here, little brother." I took a slow breath and walked over. Pierce turned to Audrey with a massive fake smile. "Audrey, this is Elias, the quiet one." Audrey extended a perfectly manicured hand. "A pleasure, Elias. Pierce talks about you rarely, but always with—" She paused, her intelligent eyes searching for a polite word. "With pity," Pierce interrupted loudly, laughing hysterically. His wealthy frat bro groomsman chuckled in agreement. "Seriously though, Elias is a good kid. He works down at the municipal courthouse." Audrey's eyebrows raised in genuine interest. "Oh? Are you an attorney? What kind of law?" No. Pierce aggressively waved his hand in front of my face. "He's admin, files the messy paperwork, answers angry phone calls from poor people, keeps the wheels turning for the important people who actually matter." He reached out and physically patted my cheek like I was a helpless toddler. The humiliation burned like pure battery acid in my self-chest. I looked at my mother, standing 3 feet away, watching the degrading interaction with a pleasant, vacant smile. She saw absolutely nothing wrong with it. I looked back at Audrey. She was not smiling. Her hand had frozen mid-air as she pulled it back from our brief handshake. Her dark eyes locked onto my face. She was a brilliant CEO who dealt with high-stakes corporate warfare. She had an impeccable memory for faces. "Elias?" she repeated softly, testing the name cautiously. Chloe stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "Actually, Pierce, Elias is—" I grabbed Chloe's wrist, squeezing firmly, and gave her a microscopic shake of my head. "Not yet." I wanted Pierce to climb as high up his fragile pedestal as he possibly could before the wind knocked him down. Audrey didn't look away from me. Her eyes dropped slowly to the subtle, heavy gold pin securely fastened on my suit lapel, a discreet insignia reserved exclusively for sitting members of the state judiciary. Her breath hitched. I gave her a tiny, imperceptible nod, a silent, terrifying confirmation. The vibrant, confident woman looked like she had just seen a ghost. Dinner was a twisted masterpiece of social engineering. Pierce and Audrey sat at the head of the massive mahogany table. I was purposefully placed at the very far end, near the swinging kitchen doors where the caterers rushed in and out. Next to me sat Chloe, vibrating with rage. Directly across from me sat Marcus, a ruthless corporate lawyer. I recognized him instantly. He had appeared in my courtroom exactly 6 months ago, representing a massive tech firm in a nasty intellectual property dispute. Out of context, in a dimly lit backyard, he hadn't placed my face yet, but he kept squinting at me over his expensive wine glass, his brow furrowed in deep concentration. The multi-course dinner began, dominated by Pierce's booming, obnoxious voice. "It's all about total leverage," Pierce bragged to the table, cutting into his rare steak. "In business, you establish absolute dominance early. Show a hint of weakness, they eat you alive. Right, Audrey?" Audrey was staring intensely at her untouched gourmet food. She looked up, her eyes flicking nervously toward my end of the table. "Yes," she said quietly, her voice strained. Aunt Martha leaned heavily across the table, her overpowering cheap floral perfume masking the smell of the roasted vegetables. "Well, Pierce, we are just so incredibly proud of you. A vice president before 40. You've always been the undisputed star of this family." She turned her cruel gaze down the long table to me. "Isn't that right, Elias? Make sure you don't lose that little admin job of yours. I hear the economy is terrible, and you don't have a 401k to fall back on like Pierce." One of the drunk groomsmen snorted, spilling red wine on the pristine tablecloth. "Yeah, Elias, keep answering those phones, buddy. Someone has to transfer the calls while the big boys work." I calmly sliced a small piece of steak, placed it in my mouth, and chewed slowly. I didn't break eye contact with the groomsmen. I let the silence stretch out, heavy and suffocating. Marcus, the lawyer sitting across from me, suddenly stopped chewing. He dropped his heavy silver fork. It hit the porcelain plate with a sharp, violent clack. He stared directly at my face, his eyes widening in pure, unadulterated horror. He had finally placed me. He realized he was sitting at a dinner table, watching a drunk groomsman openly mock a sitting superior court judge. Marcus opened his mouth to speak, his face turning an ashen gray. But Pierce abruptly stood up at the head of the table. Pierce tapped his butter knife aggressively against his crystal wine glass. Ding, ding, ding. The 150 guests turned their undivided attention to the golden child. "Thank you, everyone," Pierce began, his voice dripping with nauseating false humility. "I want to say a few words about this incredible woman beside me. Audrey is brilliant. She runs a massive company, handles cutthroat deals, and never backs down from a fight." He paused, letting the praise sink in. Then, incapable of sharing the spotlight without putting someone else down, he pointed a steak knife straight down the long table, directly at my chest. "Audrey and I, we operate in the real world, the high-stakes world," Pierce sneered. "We don't just sit in a sad little cubicle pushing paper around all day. No offense, Elias, we need paper pushers too. But when the real pressure hits, you need actual leaders. You need people who command respect." My father nodded in solemn, pathetic agreement. My mother beamed with pride. I calmly set my knife down. I wiped my mouth meticulously with my linen napkin. I looked directly into Audrey's eyes. Audrey stood up. She didn't tap her glass. She stood up so abruptly and violently that her heavy chair scraped harshly against the stone patio, a terrible, screeching, grinding sound that instantly silenced the entire yard. "Pierce," Audrey said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was absolutely freezing. It was the terrifying tone of a CEO about to terminate an entire executive department without a shred of mercy. "Yes, honey?" Pierce smiled, completely oblivious to his impending execution. Audrey aggressively turned her body, ignoring him entirely, and looked straight down the table, at me. "Elias," she said, her clear voice echoing in the dead silent yard. "I sincerely apologize. I was so caught up in the terrible introductions earlier. But I need to ask you, what exactly is it that you do at the downtown courthouse. Every single person at the table held their breath. I looked at my arrogant brother, whose goofy smile was starting to slip. I looked at my parents, who suddenly looked very small and confused. "I am a judge," I said calmly, my voice steady and clear. "I preside over the civil division." The silence that followed was absolute. It was deafening. Marcus, the lawyer across from me, practically shrank under the table, putting his head in his hands. Before Pierce could even process the words, Audrey delivered the final, fatal bombshell. "I know," Audrey said loudly, her voice dripping with venom, turning back to face Pierce. "Because last year, when my company was facing a vicious $12 million corporate espionage lawsuit, Judge Elias Thorne is the man who presided over my trial. He is the man who saved my entire empire. He is not a paper pusher. He is a titan." The expensive crystal glass in my father's hand slipped. It shattered violently against the stone floor. Update 2. The sharp, violent sound of my father's glass shattering echoed like a literal gunshot. The fragile, meticulously crafted illusion my family had spent decades building had just cracked wide open, and the jagged pieces were scattered at their feet. It was the exact kind of terrifying, breathless silence that follows a massive car crash. I watched the earth-shattering realization wash over my mother's face. Her skin transitioned rapidly from her expensive spray-tanned glow to a sickly shade of pale gray. Her jaw went completely slack. For 33 years, her entire reality was built on the unquestionable certainty that I was a massive failure and Pierce was a king. Now, the highly successful billionaire Pierce was using to elevate his own status, had just crowned me instead. Pierce's narcissistic mind violently rejected reality to protect his fragile ego. He let out a loud, obnoxious, forced laugh. "Wow, Audrey," he chuckled, wiping a thick bead of sweat from his forehead. "That is a really good one. You actually had them going for a second. Elias? A judge? The guy who was literally carrying bags of wet ice from Walmart an hour ago? Come on, honey. We all know Elias is just the admin guy. He probably handed you a parking voucher once and you remembered his face." He reached across the table to grab Audrey's hand, attempting to reestablish his dominance. Audrey ripped her hand away as if his skin was covered in lethal poison. "Do not touch me, Pierce," she said, her voice dropping an entire octave. "This is not a joke. I do not play games with the legal system." The man sitting at the end of this table, the man you just publicly humiliated in front of 100 people, dismantled the opposing counsel's ridiculous arguments with absolute brilliance. He saw right through the fraud. He dismissed the baseless claims with extreme prejudice. He is one of the most respected, feared legal minds in this state. My mother practically choked on oxygen. She gripped the table so hard, her knuckles turned white. "Elias," she stammered, her voice shaking violently. "Tell her to stop making a scene. Tell her the truth. You sort the mail. Stop embarrassing your brother in front of his important friends." Even faced with undeniable truth from a CEO, her knee-jerk instinct was to protect Pierce. She demanded I shrink myself down to the size of a pathetic paper pusher just to save her golden child's pride. "I never said I worked in the basement, Mother," I replied smoothly, leaning back in my chair and unbuttoning my suit jacket. The heavy lead armor I had worn for years was finally coming off. "Aunt Martha made a completely baseless assumption because she is a bitter, gossiping woman. You eagerly agreed because it fit your twisted narrative. I simply chose not to correct you because I knew you would never believe me anyway. I was appointed to the bench 3 years ago." "That is impossible," Aunt Martha shrieked, standing up and pointing a shaking finger at me. "Judges come from old money. You drive a used sedan. You are a complete fraud." Before I could respond to her blinding ignorance, Marcus stood up. The ruthless corporate lawyer pushed his heavy wooden chair back, his hands trembling. He turned his body completely away from me, face Pierce and my parents. "She is telling the absolute, undeniable truth," Marcus projected his authoritative courtroom voice. "I am a senior partner at a massive corporate law firm. I stand in front of judges every single week, and I can tell you right now, Judge Thorne is notoriously strict, brilliantly sharp, and absolutely terrifying if you walk into his courtroom unprepared. I lost a major intellectual property case to his ruling just 6 months ago, and it was the most thorough legal defeat of my entire career. Marcus turned to me and bowed his head deeply. Good evening, Your Honor. I deeply apologize for not recognizing you sooner out of your judicial robes. Good evening, Marcus, I replied calmly, taking a sip of my water. Are you enjoying the steak? Marcus swallowed hard, nodded aggressively, and sat back down, looking completely terrified. He realized he had just spent 2 hours laughing as his wealthy friends mocked a man who could legally ruin his career with a single signature. Pierce's face twisted into a mask of pure, ugly rage. His carefully constructed reality was collapsing. He slammed both fists onto the table, knocking over a crystal water pitcher. You did this on purpose, Pierce screamed, his voice cracking. He was no longer a polished executive. He was a deeply insecure child, throwing a tantrum. You planned this, Elias. You waited until my engagement party to embarrass me because you're a jealous loser. I did absolutely nothing, Pierce, I said, my voice dead calm. I carried your ice. I wiped your tables. I stood in the corner expecting nothing. You are the one who felt the sickening need to use me as a footstool to elevate your own fragile ego. Your arrogance ruined your night. You lied to us, my father roared, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. What kind of manipulative psychopath hides a massive promotion and huge salary from his own flesh and blood? The kind of person who knows exactly how this deeply toxic family operates, I fired back, my voice finally rising to cut through the night air. If I had told you the truth 3 years ago, Dad, what would have happened? You would have demanded I give Pierce a massive loan for his failing investments. Mom would have paraded me around the country club, taking full credit for my success, despite refusing to pay a single dime for my college. You would have used my title to get out of speeding tickets. You would have destroyed my peace. I didn't hide my career because I was ashamed. I hid it to protect myself from your endless, consuming greed. The 150 guests were completely paralyzed, caught in the crossfire of a wealthy family imploding in real time. Audrey looked at Pierce. She watched him completely unravel, hurling vicious insults and playing the victim when he was the primary aggressor. The veil was lifted. Audrey, listen to me, Pierce pleaded, his tone shifting to whining desperation. He reached for her hand again. Elias is twisting the narrative. He's just jealous. There is no us anymore, Pierce, Audrey said quietly. She reached for her left hand and deliberately gripped the massive $80,000 diamond engagement ring. I happen to know from checking public legal records that he took out a high-interest 29% APR personal loan for that ring. She slid the heavy diamond off her finger and placed it gently on the pristine white tablecloth next to his half-eaten steak. What are you doing? Pierce gasped, the blood draining entirely from his face. Audrey, stop! You're making a scene! My business contacts are watching! I do not care who is watching, Audrey said, resolute and devoid of affection. I built my company from the ground up. I surround myself with people of high integrity. I watched you treat your own brother like absolute garbage tonight. If this is how you treat your own flesh and blood, I cannot even begin to imagine how you will treat me when I no longer serve your fragile ego. The wedding is permanently off. She picked up her designer clutch, turned her back on the golden child, and walked away with the supreme confidence of a woman who just dodged a highly destructive bullet. Pierce let out a guttural sound of pure panic, scrambled out of his chair and ran after her, begging and completely humiliating himself in front of every executive he had invited. My mother collapsed heavily into her chair, burying her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably as her makeup ran down her fingers. Her perfect party was destroyed. Her social standing was going to be the subject of vicious gossip for the next decade. I stood up slowly, buttoned my jacket, and looked at Chloe, who was glowing with unapologetic triumph. I think it's time for me to go, I said quietly. As we walked through the dead silent crowd, people literally parted ways for me, stepping back with wide eyes full of newfound fear and respect. Near the side gate, a heavy hand grabbed my shoulder, pulling me into the shadows. I turned sharply, fists clenched, ready to defend myself. But it was Uncle Robert, my father's older brother. Elias, wait, Robert hissed, looking around nervously. You went way too far tonight. You didn't have to destroy your mother publicly. You should have taken the high road and let the boy have his night. I didn't destroy anyone, Uncle Robert. The truth came out, that is all. Robert sighed heavily, shifting his weight. I know. I know you're a sitting judge, Elias. I froze. The cool night air suddenly felt freezing. What did you just say? I knew, Robert whispered, trembling with guilt. 2 years ago, at a charity gala, I saw a legal publication. Your face was on the cover. Youngest appointed judge. I locked myself in the bathroom and read the whole article. I saw your credentials. I knew everything. The betrayal hit me harder than any of Pierce's drunken insults. You knew for 2 whole years? I demanded, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. You sat at every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, and let them mock me? You let Aunt Martha call me a paper pusher to my face while you passed the gravy? Why? Robert looked up with cowardly tears. Because of your mother. You know she has a weak heart. Her entire identity is tied to Pierce being the ultimate success story. If I revealed that you were vastly more powerful and wealthier than Pierce, it would have shattered her. Pierce's real estate deals were failing behind closed doors. He was drowning in debt. I hid your success to protect his fragile ego and your mother's health. I was holding the family together. I stared at the man I had once respected, feeling profound, sickening disgust. You didn't hold the family together, Robert, I said, dripping with pure, jagged ice. You enabled a deeply toxic delusion. You willingly sacrificed my dignity and mental health just to protect a bully. You chose the lie over your own nephew. Do not ever contact me again. I walked to my car, leaving him alone in the dark. The absolute fallout over the next few weeks was incredibly swift, legally brutal, and spectacular to witness. Clara didn't just break off the engagement. She completely severed all professional and financial ties with Pierce and his entire firm. It turned out a highly significant portion of Pierce's massive promotion was directly tied to managing lucrative accounts for Audrey's real estate empire. When she formally pulled her business citing irreconcilable ethical differences, Pierce's firm panicked. The board initiated an aggressive internal review, stripped away the nepotism, and realized he was utterly incompetent. He had been riding Audrey's coattails. He was fired on a Friday, escorted out by corporate security, holding a small cardboard box. Without his bloated salary, the silver Maserati was instantly repossessed. He was evicted from his luxury downtown penthouse 30 days later. My phone rang incessantly for 14 straight days with frantic voicemails. I ignored every single one. Then, one rainy Tuesday evening, there was a loud knock at my secure condo door. I checked the camera and opened it to find my parents standing in the first hallway. They looked like they had aged 10 years. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by rumpled raincoats. Their arrogant posture was entirely broken. Elias, my mother wept openly, attempting to push her way inside. Thank God, we desperately need your legal help. I stood firmly in the doorway, blocking her path. What do you want? My father wrung his hands nervously. It's Pierce. He lost his job. And worse, he is facing a massive lawsuit from a former client over a botched commercial deal. They are accusing him of gross negligence and fraud. He needs a lawyer, Elias. A really good one. And we simply cannot afford it. What happened to your massive savings accounts? I asked coldly. What happened to the country club retirement fund you bragged about at every Thanksgiving? The one you used to mock me for not having? My mother burst into hysterical tears. We gave it all to him. We drained our 401k accounts to help him pay off the $80,000 engagement ring and fund that disastrous party. We thought he would marry Audrey and take care of us. Elias, you are a sitting judge. You have massive connections. You have to call in a favor to help your brother. Fight this lawsuit. I looked at the two people who had actively chosen to belittle me, severely ignore my potential, and completely fund my brother's destructive narcissism at my expense. You want me to use my hard-earned salary and professional legal connections to save the man who publicly humiliated me? I asked, deadly calm. He is your flesh and blood brother, my father yelled, a flash of his old commanding anger returning, proving he hadn't learned a single thing. Family helps family. You owe us for raising you. Family, I repeated, tasting the toxic word. Where exactly was this family when I was mopping biohazards on night shifts to pay for my law books because you refused to touch the college fund? Where was this family when I passed the bar exam? Where was this family when Pierce stood up and told 100 people I was a pathetic paper pusher? You didn't want a successful son. You wanted a convenient scapegoat. And now that your golden calf has been slaughtered by his own hubris, you want me to clean up the financial blood. Elias, please, my mother begged, sinking to her knees in the hallway, grabbing the fabric of my trousers. If he loses this lawsuit, he will go completely bankrupt. He'll lose absolutely everything. He'll have to move back in with us. Then he will finally learn the actual value of hard work, I said gently, but firmly, pulling my leg away from her grasp. I am not an admin. I am not a paper pusher. And I am absolutely not your personal ATM. You made your investment in Pierce decades ago. Now you get to live with the terrible returns. I suggest you hire a public defender. They stared at me in pure shock. I closed the heavy wooden door quietly, the lock clicking firmly into place, sealing them out of my life forever. It has been exactly 1 full year since that disastrous engagement party blew my toxic family apart. The very next morning, I officially blocked their phone numbers, Aunt Martha, Uncle Robert, and every extended relative who participated in my degradation. I established an impenetrable boundary. I hear through the grapevine, mostly from my cousin Chloe, who I proudly have dinner with every Sunday, that Pierce did indeed declare Chapter 7 bankruptcy. The lawsuit drained his hidden assets. He is currently working a mid-level retail management job, selling cell phones at a mall kiosk and living in my parents' damp basement. My parents are constantly fighting. The immense stress of their sudden financial ruin is tearing their 40-year marriage apart. They are currently exploring divorce, fighting bitterly over custody of the remaining pathetic scraps of their broken estate. They stopped going to the country club because they can no longer afford the dues, and everyone knows exactly what happened. As for me, I am thriving. I wake up early, drink good coffee, and walk into the downtown courthouse with a clear head. I put on my heavy black robe, sit high on the bench, and make critical decisions that require deep empathy and an unwavering commitment to the truth. I no longer shrink myself down to make insecure people feel comfortable. I learned a massive, life-altering lesson that night. Silence is not always peace. Sometimes, silence is just the slow, quiet death of your own self-respect. When you allow toxic family members to define your worth, they will always price you at a massive discount. Top comments. User 1. You get to live with the terrible returns. Holy crap. Spoken like a true judge, delivering the absolute final verdict. Your parents literally gambled their entire retirement on the golden child and lost everything. The fact that they still tried to guilt trip you into saving him after draining their 401k for an $80,000 ring at 29% APR, LMOA, what an idiot, is mind-blowing. Good on Audrey for dropping him instantly. User 2. The audacity of Uncle Robert makes my blood boil. He knew for 2 years that you were a highly successful judge, and he just sat there, eating turkey, while Aunt Martha called you a paper pusher? All to protect your mom's weak heart and Pierce's failing ego? That is the ultimate betrayal. I am so incredibly glad you cut every single one of those enablers off. Enjoy your peace, Your Honor. User 3. I literally cheered out loud when Marcus, the opposing lawyer, stood up and said, "Good evening, Your Honor," in front of the whole table. Pierce thought he was the smartest guy in the room, but he brought a knife to a nuclear legal fight. Also, making you carry 15 bags of ice in a tailored suit just to assert dominance? Your mom got exactly what she deserved. The basement is a fitting kingdom for her golden boy.